Alan, you coined a phrase in your February article, free world defense, premised on strength and winning. And as you mentioned, that is also something important to President Trump. The American Security Council Foundation is founded on a strategy of peace through strength, very big in our past as well as future. So let's talk more about strength and winning in Ukraine and Taiwan after these words. Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, and back with us is our senior fellow, Alan Dowd. Welcome back, Alan.
Good to be here as always, Joy.
Good to have you back, Alan. Okay, today we're going to touch on Alan's February article titled New Strategy for a New Era, and your March article, Deterrents or War in the Taiwan Strait. And you can find all of Alan's articles on our website at www.ascf.us. Sign up for our newsletter and consider donating so we continue to bring public awareness to national security issues. Alan, first, let's go back to your free world defense phrase and the premise of strength and a focus on winning. When you say a focus on winning, are you saying this in the sense of deterrence and defense of democracies, not pushing democracies on others, but maintaining that international rule-based order we discussed?
Right. The second, that's correct, Joy. As the name suggests, free world defense, this concept phrase I've coined, it's not, I don't think, profound or particularly new, but it's premised on the idea that the free world should focus on defending its own and defending the free world's space, the free world, members of the free world, not on rolling back tyranny, though I think that's a laudable and noble goal, and times in American history it's been part of what we're focused on. I don't think there's political will for that right now. So we should focus on defending the free world, and that February column lays out several guideposts or items we could pursue toward that goal.
Yes, and I'm going to touch on one of those. In your February article, you mentioned that free world defense means sustained commitments. In this paragraph, you talk about the U.S. helping free nations harden their territory against invasion.
Yes.
With regards to Ukraine, and more specifically the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, a security assurance that the U.S., UK, and Russia signed so that the Ukraine would have a security assurance on their sovereignties and give up their nuclear weapons. Russia violated this memorandum, as we all know. And while the U.S. didn't do anything militarily, we did put sanctions on Russia, but they have not stopped Russia's military advances into Ukraine presently. So, Alan, do you believe the U.S. and UK can honor this? How do you believe the U.S. and UK can honor this security assurance to defend Ukraine's sovereignty so Russia doesn't continue to advance?
Well, we can't go back in time. Can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The deal was very clearly delineated in that Budapest Memorandum that if Ukraine gives up its nuclear weapons, ship them into Russian Federation, that the United States, Britain, and Russia would recognize and honor and respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Russia did not do that, starting clearly in 2014. And what can be done now with security guarantees, that's what President Zelensky is asking for. That's not what it sounds to me the United States right now is willing to give. There are some European countries that are willing to provide those guarantees, but all of those European countries, our NATO allies, say that they need U.S. backup or U.S. as a backstop to assist in that.
Yes, and not all of NATO is going to agree to a security assurance, it looks like, for Ukraine to enter NATO all at this point.
That's correct. Though, as you know, and your listeners know, Joy, a country doesn't have to be in NATO to have a security guarantee. It's easy to imagine bilateral security guarantees for Ukraine that could support and guarantee a post-war peace, a post-war security arrangement. If the United States could part of that. I think that would be the most effective way
Yes.
to get to that point. The United States, Britain, it sounds to me like Britain and France are really leading the way in wanting to provide that post-war security, but they do need some what they call enablers or backstops from the United States. It sounds like right now the United States isn't willing to provide that. Maybe the Trump administration will come along. Right now they're taking a pretty tough line against that.
Yeah.
But going back to your point that you began our discussion with, Joy, about the Budapest Memorandum, and you led into that with the hardening point I was making with free world defense, hardening the free world against attack. The thing that we have to keep in mind with the Ukraine example is Ukraine was not hardened against attack. We did not do enough to assist Ukraine, and our European allies didn't do enough to bolster up or brace Ukraine to the point that it might deter Russia from attacking.
Yes.
That,
I mean,
all that
obviously,
aid,
nuclear weapons probably would have done that, but
that would have done it. You're
agreed to
exactly
give them
right.
up.
You're exactly right, Joy. That would have done it. There's no doubt that that's an object lesson about Ukraine and Russia. A country without nuclear weapons is defenseless against a stronger conventional power like Russia. And I'm sure that lesson is not lost on several countries around the world, including South Korea. We just heard, I think last week, the president of Poland raised the issue of Poland maybe needing to be a nuclear power. President Zelensky in Ukraine has said we either need a security guarantee from NATO or we need nuclear weapons. And Ukraine, Poland, South Korea, all of them could go nuclear very quickly, very easily. They're advanced countries. They're technologically advanced. They have the resources, intellectual, economic, to access those and build those weapons. So,
and as you're saying, I think also, Iran is looking at this situation as well.
That's right. Iran, there's no doubt about it, Iran in the back of its mind or front of its mind for decades has been the one thing that certainly gets the attention of the United States is if you're a nuclear state that takes certain things off the table, and that probably will accelerate Iran's drive or further it. They've been driving toward the nuclear club for a while. But I think that you hit the nail on the head, as you usually do, Joy, that this is was a major mistake for the Western powers to allow Ukraine to really say to Ukraine, we promise you'll have security if you give up these weapons, and then to not come through on that promise in some way.
Yeah, and I think it just looks bad on us as well, and UK for signing this and then not. I mean, we put sanctions out there, but obviously that wasn't enough.
Right, and your listeners need to remember this didn't start in 2022. Putin's attack on Ukraine began in 2014, and there were things we could have done in 2014 that we did not do, and then in the 8 years between 14 and 22, we could have done more to bolster.
Yes, and I think in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea, that was the Obama administration.
Yes.
And I believe that Putin probably looked at this as maybe a weaker administration that wasn't going to militarily do anything, as far as if you looked at Syria and they drew a red line, Syria crossed it, we didn't do anything.
I think you're totally right. I think it's hard to get into the head of Vladimir Putin, but I think you're correct. And there were people saying that, including me, in 2014 at the time, that you have to respond to this. We could even make the case, as I did, 2008, that there was not much response from NATO and Europe and the United States when Putin invaded Georgia. Now, the Bush administration did rush Georgian troops out of the Middle East by U.S. Air Force transport planes into Georgia, and that secured and maybe prevented Putin from taking Tbilisi. But Putin's record of aggression goes back many years. I would submit at least 20 years, probably at least to 2004. And we're now getting to the consequence of appeasing him or not doing enough to stop him.
Yeah, and actually that's a very good point with 2008, and he still has parts of Georgia that Russia controls at this time. time.
Yes, he does. You're correct.
Okay, sorry, you went out there a little bit.
Hear me now?
Yep.
So yeah, that's correct. He is. Russia has annexed 2 provinces of Georgia, has annexed several pieces of Ukraine, and his goal is to absorb all of Ukraine. We know that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think he's also mentioned to rebuild the USSR as it was. But we've got to stop him somewhere so that he does not continue to advance. And I'm sure this is what all the NATO nations are looking at, So going back to what you were saying about this was a memorandum, not a treaty. And NATO is a treaty, is that
right
assurance that we will have each other's back. So they could do a different kind of treaty or agreement like you were talking about.
Right.
And I really think that they should do an updated security agreement, or I don't think Zelensky's going to feel that there's any trust as far as what Putin will do.
And very wisely put, Joy, why would he? He looks back at the record just in his own time as being president. I'm talking about Zelensky. And Russia has violated a number of agreements. And even if you look deeper, further back, over Putin's entire time as president, he's violated numerous treaties and agreements, including with the United States, treaties with the United States. So the answer to that is going back to the great wisdom of President Reagan. Trust but verify, which really means I don't trust you, right? I mean, really, trust but verify means I'm going to check up on you to make sure you're keeping your word. And so the way to do that when it comes to security is you have to bolster Ukraine, strengthen it, and I do think that could be done with multiple bilateral security agreements. By the way, your listeners may know or may not know that several countries have come into bilateral security agreements with Ukraine, committing to long-term, I mean like decades-long weapons development and partnership on weapons delivery, training, and the United States signed one with Ukraine last year. I know that Ukraine and Britain, Ukraine and Poland, Ukraine and France, Ukraine and the United States, at least those, and there's others, have signed bilateral security agreements. Again, they're not like treaties. They're certainly not the equivalent of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty, but they are maybe a good step in the right direction to keep Putin from moving any further.
Yes, I know I've heard it out of, I think UK and France were saying we can't reward Putin by allowing him to continue on. So he has to be stopped at some point. Whether it's a security agreement, I know Trump's working out a ceasefire deal with him at this time. I understand that they're possibly going to lift some sanctions on Russia.
Well, you know that the first step to security would be some type of ceasefire. Ceasefire would be a first step toward peace. And it's going to be an imperfect peace if we even get to there. Yeah. But we've dealt with imperfect peaces over the last, 100 years, 50 years, certainly during the Cold War. The South Korea, North Korea peace or armistice was imperfect. The agreement that divided Europe after World War II was imperfect, but it did keep some semblance of peace. So there are examples out there and models where we can find a way and find a way to end the war and have some security in that region, which I do think is in our interests.
Yes, I do too.
For sure.
Because as we were saying earlier, I think the rest of the world is watching how this is going to go down.
That's right, especially China. That's right.
Well, and with regards to, that brings me right into the next section of your your March paper on Taiwan.
Yes.
So Taiwan, a similar situation. There is a vague U.S. 1979 Taiwan Relations Act that implies a security commitment, but it's kind of vague on how we would respond or how far we would go to defend Taiwan. And we know the CCP's military is much larger than Taiwan's. But Alan, do you think the CCP can continue to be deterred, knowing that the U.S. and other Asian Pacific alliances would defend Taiwan.
Well, I think that Xi Jinping would be deterred if he knew that the United States would come to the defense of Taiwan. I don't think that is clear. As you allude to, the Taiwan Relations Act is deliberately vague. They call it strategic ambiguity. It's been called, it doesn't make clear that the United States would definitely come to Taiwan's defense if attacked. It uses phrases like, will provide defensive equipment or defensive assistance. It's very different than what's known as Article 5 protection, which is what we see with treaties with Japan, South Korea, Australia, Philippines, the NATO allies. So, and we used to have a security joint defense agreement with Taiwan before the TRA and before the 1970s change. But so I'm of the view that I agree with your premise, but we're not there yet, that we would extend a clear statement of security and defense to Taiwan if attacked. I do think that would deter Xi, but I don't think we haven't extended that, and I don't think we're to the point where we're willing to right now either.
And I was going to say that to that point, should we look at updating this security agreement?
I'm an advocate of that. I've been for many years, written about that for 20 years, that to replace strategic ambiguity with strategic clarity. We have sent strange signals to China. You know, President Biden, I think on at least 3 specific occasions, said we would defend Taiwan if attacked. When a president says something, a president's words have meaning. That's important. President Biden and President Trump deployed secretly or low-profile trainers, military trainers, onto Taiwan. President Trump allowed Navy ships to port there. We've sent some aid, but there's a $20 billion military aid backlog right now that's our fault, not Taiwan's, that we need to clear and get delivered to them. Now, Taiwan has some things to do too, and this is where President Trump makes a good point. You know, that's a country that's literally in the crosshairs, and it is spending less than 2.5% of GDP on defense. That doesn't make much sense to me. You know, I think I mentioned in that column, countries in similar situations that are in the crosshairs of enemies, whether it be Israel, Poland, Ukraine, other countries that the Baltics all spend well above 3%. Some of them spend 5% of GDP on defense.
Yes, I think you were talking about Japan upping theirs to 5%.
Yeah, Japan is going to double its defense. It's going to be the 3rd largest defense military spending country on earth by 2027 because of concerns over North Korea and China. So I do think Taiwan needs to invest more in its defense, but we need to do our part to get the equipment to them that we promised them too.
That would help with deterrence for sure.
Yes.
So on another note,
it's a delicate. I mean, President Eisenhower once said, as Kennedy came to office, he apparently said to him, "There'll be no easy matters that come to your desk. Everything that's easy is going to be solved by someone else." It's very true, and a lot of us who write about and comment on foreign policy, like you and me, it's a lot easier to comment on it than to execute foreign policy. This is a very delicate, difficult matter because if you push too hard or too far, you might force China to do something or tempt it to do something. If you don't do enough, China might act. So it's a very delicate path we're walking. But I do think that China can be deterred. China is imminently deterrable because it does care about its regime does care about its existence. You know. And
yes. And I think economically too. I mean, implications that way from other nation states.
Enormous implication on both sides, as you know, Joy. I mean, a war involving China and Taiwan and the United States would affect the global economy. It would badly affect the U.S. and Chinese economies, and hopefully China would keep that in mind and not take that terrible final step of trying to do in Taiwan what Putin has tried to do in Ukraine. I hope that doesn't happen, but we can help Xi understand that by being clearer, and clarity plus strength, I think, is the formula for keeping some semblance of peace. We learned that in the Cold War, and Reagan was masterful at that. I think the Trump administration would do well to brush up on some of Reagan's history.
Yes, and be clear on an agreement there, a security agreement, that certainly would send a message.
By the way, there's support, at least there was in the last Congress in 24. I don't know about the new Congress, but there's bipartisan support for defending Taiwan. And there's a large amount of public support for it, too. So that's important, I think.
Yes, and I don't know if it was the last Congress or the one prior, but I know our former senator in Florida put a bill forward to update that Taiwan Relations Act, but it never passed through.
That's right.
The House.
That's correct.
So we'll have to see where that goes. But I do agree with what you're saying. A lot easier for us to talk about possible solutions than execute them, and that is a hard decision for any president there.
Right,
so
but
Ukraine, Russia, and Taiwan, China, both.
That's right, but they run for that job, and that's they're called to do that duty, and we should be supportive as much as we can. Yes. But this is a very difficult one. Whereas, well, I think it's clear. I'm a big defender. I use the word free world defense, the phrase free world defense, and I think it's kind of easy. Let's say let's defend the free world, but how you do it is the question, and how far you push these great powers like Russia and China, where you can compromise. Those are really become the question marks, and whether it's right to compromise at certain times. I think it's good that the United States, by the way, is in the middle of negotiations to try to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine. But I don't know if we're going about it the right way, if we're tilting toward one side or acing out or Ukrainians who are a democratic country.
That we're leaning toward Putin, but I also could see, and again, very delicate situation for a president. I can also see where maybe he's looking at lifting some of these sanctions so that Russia feels that they have the ability to get, I think it was an agricultural sanction they wanted lifted.
Sure, that's what statecraft is. That's what diplomacy is finding common ground. And I do think there's a need for face saving in diplomacy with the great power, especially in nuclear power. We're not dealing here with Saddam Hussein. I understand that the Biden administration was very concerned about Russia and the nuclear escalatory possibilities. But we always have to keep, I think, at the front of our minds that one of these sides is the aggressor, and one of these sides is a free member of the free world and is a democracy.
Yes, very good point. And you said it right, too. You not push too hard, but because with the Taiwan-China situation, I posed this question. I think a lot of our listeners probably already know the answer, but I have seen comments about why China just doesn't recognize himself as a sovereign country of Taiwan, sovereign country of Taiwan, instead of the ROC, the Republic of China, just dropping that.
I think that they know that if they did that Beijing calls that a red line, one of their red lines, that would mean that they would move toward immediate unification. Notice I didn't say reunification. I always remind folks when I give talks or my students that Taiwan has never been ruled by the People's Republic of China. Taiwan has been part of historic China, but not of the PRC or the CCP dominated one. So what Xi is talking about is unification, forced annexation. And I think if Taipei would to decide that it's declared independence, I think that would be a red line. So, for years, there's been kind of this two Chinas or one China, two systems or things like that these kind of word games that every side has played. But it seems Xi really has a sense that he wants to be a historic figure and wants to be the one who unifies all Chinese lands. And that's something where deterrence does come into play, and you have to be clear.
Yeah, and we know he's not afraid to advance. Obviously, he's done that with Hong Kong. So,
right, and it's not just Hong Kong, Joy. Your listeners probably know that China's been in an aggressive mode, claiming territorial waters of other countries, claiming literally, atolls and small little islands or rocks in the South China Sea as its own. Militarizing those islands when it promised the Obama administration wouldn't do that, and they did. So it is expanding, and it is doing it maybe in a kind of a what you talk about sometimes, a gray zone type way, kind of below the threshold of war, but still it's aggression nonetheless.
Yes, certainly with the Philippines as well. We're watching.
Right.
I mean, I haven't seen it lately too much, but watching their fishing boats that are part of their Coast Guard really harass
That's right.
the
Good air
Philippines.
quotes.
Yeah.
Proper use of air quotes, because that China's fishing boats and maritime, the militia and Coast Guard, those are all really easily converted to or technically arms of the Chinese military. And use those to overwhelm, and they've shown it. I mean, we've seen videos that overwhelm Philippine vessels that are in Philippine waters in some cases. And Philippines is a treaty ally, full-blown treaty ally. So that's when, during the first Trump administration, I think Secretary Pompeo made it clear, Secretary of State Pompeo at the time, that that attack on Philippine islands and outlying islands would be considered something that the United States would come to the defense of the Philippines over. It's not just the home islands or the main islands. That was something that was very clear during the Trump administration. I don't know if that needs to be restated or not, but this is I do think this is an aggressive country we're dealing with.
Well, I'm glad that is clear with the Philippines, and I think that it is, to my knowledge, still that way. But the CCP is still being risky with the Philippines, even though we have a clear agreement. So I think you're right. We need to be clear with with Taiwan here for sure.
And testing and pushing, and that's what aggressor states do. That's what tyrant regimes do. They test and push until you stop them. And the first half of our discussion, you talked about, Joy, what Putin had done, testing, pushing, and then he went for it all in February of 2022 by trying to take Kiev and lunge at Kiev, and he was stopped. But
he probably wouldn't have done that at all if we had more of a security commitment.
I agree with you. I agree with you. If those were clear, or if the security commitment was clear, or if the Ukrainians were better armed, I think that's true.
Yes.
One of the most damning, stinging things I think said about U.S. foreign policy, maybe in the last 20 years, was when Ukraine was under attack in 2014, and the Obama administration said, we'll send non-lethal aid, which included night vision goggles, medical equipment, and blankets.
Yes.
And the president of Ukraine came to our Congress, was invited to speak, and said, we can't win a war with blankets. We had a chance to do more, and we didn't.
And I mean, it's my opinion that we should continue to send military aid until there's peace there. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to deter Putin at all.
Well said. I agree with you. There's nothing they admire so much as strength, as Churchill said of the Russians.
Yes.
And there's nothing they have less respect for than military weakness. True today. And it was true.
I agree.
46.
Well, thank you, Alan. Appreciate your input and your 2 articles this March and February.
Good to chat with you all, Joy.
And to our listeners, check out Alan's articles on our website, www.ascf.us. Please also send your thoughts on U.S. security assurances abroad and other comments to this podcast on both our YouTube and Rumble channels. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Substack. And also listen to your favorite audio podcast on either Apple or your Android phones. So thank you again, Alan. Thank you to our listeners, and join us again next time for a Peace Through Strength podcast.